Touchdown, Alabama, let's get it.
The process, no one can stop this. Hottest show in the streets, I bet you can't top this. Rammer, jammer, yellow hammer, come see how we rock this. Alabama fans the best, there's no way you can top this. Recruiting news and interviews, just sit back and watch this.
Recruiting news and interviews, just sit back and watch this.
The process.
Welcome into a new week of The Process, Crimson Tide Recruiting. I am your host, Justin Smith, the scouting and recruiting analyst for Touchdown Alabama magazine. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. If you're not subscribed, be sure to hit that subscribe button below for me. Also, be sure to leave a like whether you are subscribed or not. You guys can find me here on Touchdown Alabama's YouTube page every Tuesday and Thursday evening on The Process, breaking down the latest in Crimson Tide football recruiting news. And on today's episode, I want to take a look at the Crimson Tide's top 2022 cornerback targets because I feel we are starting to see who is going to be the Tide's top cornerback targets here in this 2022 recruiting cycle. So we'll hit on that on today's episode of the show. But before we dive deeper into that, you guys know what we got to hit first. We're going to roll right into those recruiting updates. So with that being said, let's get the process started. Let's get these recruiting updates rocking and rolling, starting with 2022 four-star safety Miles Rozier out of Belleville High School in Belleville, Michigan, releasing his top four and including Michigan State, Kentucky, and also Arkansas to go along with the Crimson Tide. At the moment, the Arkansas Razorbacks look really impressive when it comes to them recruiting Miles Rozier. They are arguably the leader for the four-star prospect, so I would definitely look out for Arkansas when it comes to Miles Rozier, but the Crimson Tide are right in the mix as well. Rozier was joined by a good number of 2022 recruits who released a top school list recently and included the Tide. Devin Moore, a 2022 cornerback out of Naples High School in Naples, Florida, included the Tide in his top 7, along with programs like Miami and Notre Dame. When you look at his recruitment, I think the Crimson Tide are sitting near the top. Nick Saban and multiple members of the Tide's coaching staff are in daily contact with him. I will talk about more a little later in the show. I had an opportunity to catch up with him recently after he released that top 7. He talked about that daily contact with the Crimson Tide, multiple conversations with Nick Saban. You guys can check out that interview over at touchdownalabama.com, along with my interview with four-star defensive back Toriano Pride out of St. Louis, Missouri, out of Lutheran North High School in St. Louis, Missouri. He also released a top 7 and included the Tide. He is in heavy contact with multiple members of the Tide's coaching staff as well, including Freddie Roach and Nick Saban. You guys can hear his thoughts about Alabama as he has a top 7, which includes a lot of heavy hitters when it comes to some of the top schools in college football. His top 7, of course, Alabama is included, along with schools like Ohio State and Clemson. He is definitely one of the more highly recruited defensive backs here in this 2022 recruiting class. So be sure to check out that article and those interviews with Devin Moore and also with Toriano Pride out of St. Louis, Missouri. We're going to close out this set of recruiting updates with the Crimson Tide being included in a top 9 released by four-star running back Nicholas Singleton. Singleton was a prospect we talked about on last week of The Process when I broke down the Crimson Tide's top running back targets, as it looks as if the Crimson Tide could bring in a second running back in the 2022 recruiting class. Nicholas Singleton is definitely one of those guys to watch out for. Be sure to check out that latest episode of The Process where we broke down the Crimson Tide's top running back targets. But now we are going to dive into and take a look at the Crimson Tide's top 2022 cornerback targets. It is no secret that Nick Saban is going to sign a large group of defensive backs in each recruiting class. He has consistently done that over the last couple of recruiting cycles, and I expect nothing to change in this 2022 recruiting class. But today, we're going to take a look at some of the Tide's top defensive back targets, specifically at the cornerback position. We are going to get this breakdown started with Denver Harris, the 5-star cornerback out of North Shore High School in Houston, Texas. Looking at Harris's recruitment, he currently has a top 4 of Alabama, LSU, Texas, and Texas A&M. At the moment, I feel each school has a chance. I think Harris's recruitment is one of those recruitments where you're going to hear at several different times that this team is leading, this team is leading. I think it's going to go back and forth until he makes an official decision, which is what we have seen when it comes to his recruitment. I think the Crimson Tide are going to be heavily involved to the end because of the relationship that they have been able to build with Harris. They actually offered him when he was a freshman. And as soon as they offered him at a camp, he had an opportunity to talk with Nick Saban one-on-one. Saban told him in that conversation that you are going to be one of the top defensive backs on our board in the 2022 recruiting class when he was a freshman. And they have continued to develop that relationship with Harris. So I think the Crimson Tide are going to be heavily involved with Harris's recruitment moving forward. But when you look at what he brings to the field, he plays a physical brand of football at 6'1" and approximately 180 pounds. He has good size for the cornerback position. One of the best cornerbacks in run support, in my opinion, in the 2022 recruiting class. A guy who has good ball skills as well. You can tell that he knows how to judge the ball in the air. And he also attacks the football at its highest point. So I like a lot of things about his game, but I think the Crimson Tide are still heavily involved with the 5-star defensive back as Texas and Texas A&M try to keep him within the state, and with LSU continuing to try to push to land him as well. So Harris is a guy I'm pretty sure most Alabama fans probably know about, but if you didn't know, he's definitely one of the top cornerback targets along with the rest of the guys that we will discuss here. Pride is the next prospect I want to discuss today. I talked about Pride in the update segment as he currently has the Tide included in his top 7. And his top 7 is loaded from top to bottom. As I said earlier, he does have Alabama, Ohio State, and Clemson involved. And when you see those 3 programs chasing after one recruit, you know this recruit is really special. And I think Pride is one of those special prospects because what he brings to the field is some elite playmaking on both sides of the football field. He is one of those prospects who should be listed as an athlete. When you look at what he brings to the field, he's a prospect who excels on both sides of the football for Lutheran North High School in St. Louis, Missouri. He has breakaway speed, can easily turn interceptions, fumble recoveries into touchdowns. He has elite speed that shows itself on both sides of the football. So there's a lot to like about this elite playmaker. I think the Crimson Tide are heavily involved in his recruitment at the moment. He did tell me he was in constant contact with Nick Saban and the Tides defensive line coach Freddie Roach. He told me that he feels Alabama can turn him into a great defensive back and a great man, complementing the Tide's development, player development on and off the field. So I think the Crimson Tide are in the mix, but it's kind of hard to tell which school specifically leads because Clemson and Ohio State are 2 of the top programs in the nation, and they match up pretty well against Alabama on the recruiting trail. But Pride is a prospect to know moving forward. Earl Little Jr. out of American Heritage High School in Plantation, Florida is next up. American Heritage is the former high school of the Crimson Tide's former defensive back Patrick Surtain. You're also looking at Dallas Turner, one of the Crimson Tide's 2021 signees who spent a good portion of his high school career at American Heritage before he transferred to St. Thomas Aquinas. So the Crimson Tide has a good relationship with the coaching staff at American Heritage, with Patrick Surtain Sr. being the head coach for the American Heritage High School football team. So I think the Crimson Tide are in a good position. Little does not have a top school list at the moment, but I think if he did release one today, an hour from now, I'm pretty sure Alabama will be included in that top school list. When you look at what he brings to the table, he is an athletic cornerback who possesses good size for the position. I think he has a very high football IQ. We see multiple plays in his highlight film, in his total film, that shows that he has a very high football IQ. A guy who shows great anticipation. You see him jumping a lot of routes. You see him fighting to the end of plays. You see him playing all over the field, showing some aggressiveness as well. I think he is a kid who plays with an aggressive playing style, but he does not really make big hits, but he makes nice form tackles. You really like to see that out of a cornerback. That is going to translate to the next level for Earl Little Jr. I like a lot about his game as well. I think the Crimson Tide are definitely in the mix for this 2022 defensive back. We're going to end things with Devin Moore, the 2022 cornerback out of Naples High School in Naples, Florida. I talked about him earlier in the show as well. Nick Saban in Alabama is in daily contact with him. He's actually getting on a call with Nick Saban today, and the Crimson Tide's coaching staff really seem interested in this 2022 prospect. He could play safety at the next level, but I think the Crimson Tide will use him at cornerback. We can look at his 6'2", approximately 170-pound frame. You want to put that length at cornerback, and with his man coverage skills, I definitely want him at that position. This is a guy who's going to go stride to stride with wideouts, can mirror routes, and when he is attempting to catch an interception, it almost looks as if he's transforming into the wide receiver, just looking at the way his motions are when the ball is in the air, when he's adjusting to it, when he's trying to pull in an interception. So I am really impressed with what he brings to the table. Nick Saban seems to be really impressed with him as well, has compared him to Patrick Surtain in the past. I think he's really interested as well. He wants to take some visits before he makes an official decision like many other 2022 recruits, but he did say if the dead period is extended, he could see himself possibly making a decision sooner than later because he wants to be an early enrollee. You guys can check out more over at Touchdown Alabama in that exclusive article.